My name is Patrina R. Garman, and I'm 22. When Grandpa Joe gave me his car, my brother demanded it for college, and my parents told me to understand and stop causing problems. I said no. Then I came home one day and found the car gone. I've been living in my brother's shadow my entire life. My little brother James is 20, and he's always been treated like he's God's gift to humanity, while I'm basically the invisible kid nobody gives a crap about. It's been this way since we were kids, like our house was built with two different sets of rules depending on who was standing in the room. I still remember this one time in 8th grade when I won first place in the district science fair. I spent weeks building this solar-powered water filtration system, the kind that made my hands ache and my brain buzz all night because I couldn't stop thinking of how to make it better. I came home with the blue ribbon, and my mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice, dear," then went right back to helping James make a poster for his social studies project that was due the next day. He got a C+ on it, and they took him out for ice cream to celebrate his hard work. I stood there holding my ribbon like it was a receipt no one asked for, watching them laugh over sprinkles and whipped cream like my win was background noise. Christmas was always a complete joke in our house. James's pile of presents would be stacked to the ceiling, all the latest gaming stuff, best clothes, whatever he'd been whining about for the past 6 months. My pile was whatever cheap thing my mom could pretend was thoughtful, maybe a flannel shirt if I was lucky, and occasionally something useful for my projects. "Practical gifts," Mom would say, with this smug look, like she deserved a medal for buying me work gloves, while James unwrapped a brand new Nintendo. Dad would be out back with James, teaching him to throw a football, or helping him build a science project he'd waited until the last minute to start. I'd be in the garage alone watching YouTube videos to learn how to fix stuff because nobody had time to show me. Whenever I asked Dad for help, it was always, in a minute that somehow stretched into years. Eventually, I stopped asking. The golden child nonsense went way beyond gifts and attention. James could literally wreck Mom's car and they'd shrug it off like it was weather. "Accidents happen, honey." I'd come home 5 minutes past curfew after working a late shift at the hardware store and get grounded for 2 weeks. Different planet, different rules when you're the favorite. When we were 16 and 14, James went through this phase where he'd borrow my stuff without asking. One time he took my iPod to school, back when those were a thing, and some kid stole it from his backpack. I was furious. My parents told me I needed to be more understanding because he was going through a lot right now. The lot was that he didn't make first string on the JV basketball team. They never replaced my iPod, but 2 weeks later, James had a brand new one because he needed music for his workouts. I remember staring at the shiny box in his hands, feeling something go quiet inside me, like the part of me that expected fairness finally died. I figured out pretty early that nobody in our house had my back except me, so I shut up, kept my head down, and worked my butt off. I got my first job washing dishes at this greasy spoon diner, saved every penny, started learning trades from YouTube and the old guys at the hardware store where I eventually got hired. I didn't need their validation anyway, I told myself, even though some nights I wanted it so badly it made my throat hurt. My parents had this blind spot that was exactly my size and shape. They'd remember to buy James' favorite cereal, but forget I was allergic to peanuts. They'd drive 4 hours to see James's regional baseball game, but couldn't be bothered to attend my high school graduation because it was such a long ceremony and parking would be a nightmare. It sounds like I'm making this up, but I swear I'm not. It was like living in some twisted sitcom where I'm the side character nobody remembers until they need someone to blame. "Oh yeah," their faces would say sometimes. "There's another kid too." And James wasn't innocent in all of it. He was just as bad as my parents in his own way. Entitled, selfish, smug about his golden child status. He rubbed it in my face constantly. "Mom said yes to me, but she'd probably say no to you," he'd smirk when I was a kid. Or he'd accidentally break my stuff and act all innocent when I got mad, then watch my parents scold me for having an attitude. By the time we were in high school, I'd pretty much accepted my place in the family hierarchy. Keep expectations low and you don't get disappointed. So I focused on the stuff I could control, my grades, my jobs, my friends, my projects. The world outside our house felt more honest than the world inside it. That's where Grandpa Joe comes into the story. Grandpa Joe was the only one who ever really saw me. Ironically, he was my dad's father, a former Marine, old-school mechanic who could strip an engine blindfolded if he had to. The man was a legend with his hands. While my parents were busy cheering at James' games and obsessing over his life, I'd be at Grandpa's garage learning how to change oil, replace spark plugs, and eventually rebuild carburetors. Those were the days I actually felt like someone gave a damn about me. The garage smelled like oil and metal and coffee that had been sitting too long, and it felt like home in a way my own house never did. "You got something special in those hands, kid," Grandpa would tell me while we worked side by side on whatever beater he was fixing up. "Your dad never had the patience for this stuff, always too busy chasing the next promotion, the next big thing." He'd shake his head like he couldn't quite figure out where he went wrong with his son, and I'd pretend I didn't hear the sadness behind it. Grandpa saw right through my parents' favoritism. One time when I was 15, my parents forgot my birthday. Like, completely forgot. The day before, they'd remembered James had a swimming competition, and the whole family had to go. My mom actually said, "Oh, it's your birthday tomorrow, isn't it? We'll celebrate next weekend." They didn't. They didn't even get me a cake. When Grandpa found out, he was furious. He showed up at our house that night with a toolbox wrapped in newspaper. Inside was this beautiful set of precision screwdrivers I'd been eyeing for months. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he said loud enough for my parents to hear from the kitchen. "Some are worth celebrating properly." Every Christmas, when I opened those practical gifts from my parents, socks, school supplies, whatever, Grandpa would sneak me something real quality. Tools, mostly. Stuff I still use. One year, my mom actually complained about it. She had the nerve to say, "She doesn't need to be spoiled, Joe," like a decent set of tools was equivalent to the new phone James had just unwrapped. Grandpa stared her down like she was an idiot. Recognizing talent ain't spoiling, it's investing. Then he winked at me like we shared a secret. When I was 18, Grandpa got diagnosed with Parkinson's. Bad news, obviously. He couldn't drive anymore, and one week he called me and said he had something for me. He said it might not be pretty, but it had good bones. That was one of his favorite expressions. Good bones. Something worth saving. I drove over thinking maybe he was handing me one of his old tool sets. Instead, there was a 1967 Mustang Fastback sitting in his driveway. Faded Highland green, more rust than paint, torn seats, engine making sounds I didn't know a car could make. It looked like it had survived a war and refused to die. Holy hell, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Grandpa handed me the keys and told me he'd been saving it for me since I was 12. He said he'd watched how my parents treated me all those years and figured I deserved something that was just mine. He'd planned to restore it himself, but his hands weren't working right anymore. The Parkinson's already starting to steal little pieces of him. "Your dad never appreciated muscle cars," he said, running his hand over the rusted hood, "but you'll bring her back to life." I had to turn away for a second like something got in my eye. I didn't want him to see me crack because Grandpa wasn't the type to get sentimental. He showed love through oil changes and quiet pride, not speeches. When I drove that rust bucket home, my parents actually laughed when they saw it in the driveway. Dad didn't even look up from his phone when I told him about it. He just said, "Don't waste money on that death trap." Mom complained about oil stains on the concrete, like the car's existence was a personal inconvenience to her. James's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Wow," he said, circling it like a shark. "That's going to be so badass when it's fixed up." He sounded impressed, and for once, I felt something I'd never felt around him before. I had something he envied, something he couldn't just get by whining until our parents caved. For 1 year, I spent every spare minute on that car. Every paycheck went straight to parts after rent and food. I learned to weld. I taught myself how to rebuild the engine by watching endless videos and reading forums until my eyes burned. My hands were permanently stained with grease. My fingernails were never completely clean. My arms were covered in little burns and cuts. My room was stacked with manuals and wiring diagrams, and I'd fall asleep thinking about valve timing and wake up planning bodywork. When things got bad at home, which was always, I escaped to the garage and disappeared into the restoration. There's something almost meditative about working on cars. When you get in the zone, it's just you and the machine. Everything else fades. I sourced parts from junkyards, swap meets, online forums. I rebuilt the 390 V8 myself, piece by piece. I sanded the body down to bare metal and fixed rust spots, learning to shape metal as I went. I did the paint job in my buddy's uncle's shop after hours, trading labor for booth time. I reupholstered the interior, the whole thing. The day I finally got that engine running right, hearing that deep rumble come to life, it felt like everything I'd been working for finally paid off. The Highland green paint gleamed in the sun. The black leather interior smelled like a new start. And when I took her for that first real drive, windows down, engine growling, for once in my life, I had something that was truly mine. Something I built with my own two hands that nobody could take credit for. See, the thing about growing up as the ignored kid is you get used to people not wanting your stuff. Nobody fights to borrow your clothes or play your games because in their eyes, the golden child always has the better version anyway. So I wasn't prepared for what happened when, for once in my life, I had something worth envying. And James envied that Mustang. After I got it running properly, he couldn't stop talking about it. Every time I drove it, he'd be at the window watching like a kid staring at an ice cream truck. Whenever I pulled in, he'd come racing out to the garage. "Can I sit in it just for a minute?" At first, I didn't mind. It was actually kind of nice having someone notice the work. My parents sure didn't. Dad complained about my tools taking up space. Mom kept making passive-aggressive comments about me wasting money instead of saving for a real future, whatever that meant. But James's requests didn't stay small. They never do with him. They grew. They always grow. It went from sitting in it to asking if he could drive it to prom for one night, promising he'd be careful. Then it was the beach for the weekend. Then picking up his friends because they'd freak out. Always with that tone. The assumption that, of course, I'd say yes, because everyone always said yes to James. I always said no, not because I wanted to be cruel, because I knew James. This is the kid who broke 3 phones in 1 year. The kid who borrowed Dad's expensive golf clubs for a single afternoon and somehow lost half the set. The kid who never took care of anything because he never had to. Something always got replaced when he broke it. Responsibility never stuck to him because my parents refused to let it. So no, I wasn't letting him touch the one thing that finally felt like proof I existed. The tension started piling up fast. James rolled his eyes whenever I refused, saying things like, "It's just a car. You're so uptight." My parents started making little comments at dinner about how sharing is part of being a good sister, and that car just sits in the garage most of the time. Classic setup in our house. What James wants, James gets. Except this time, I wasn't budging. After I finished the Mustang, James acted like my garage had turned into his personal showroom. Every time I walked toward the car with my keys, he'd appear out of nowhere like he'd been waiting behind a corner. He'd lean on the door frame, grin, and try to make his ask sound casual, like he wasn't asking for something I'd spent a year bleeding for. "Just one lap around the block," he'd say, just to feel it. "No," I'd say, and keep walking. Then it turned into, "Can I drive it to prom? One night, I'll be careful." And when I said no, he'd roll his eyes and mutter, "It's just a car." Just a car, like the hours, the cuts, the burned knuckles, the weekends I didn't get to have. Like my entire life didn't change the moment that engine finally roared to life. He started getting creative. He tried buttering me up, asking about my classes, pretending to care about my job, laughing too loud at my jokes like he was auditioning to be a decent brother. I'd almost rather he just demanded it, because the fake kindness felt worse. It felt like watching someone rehearse manipulation. Then my parents started joining in. Not directly at first. It was little comments over dinner. Sharing is part of being a good sister. That car just sits in the garage most of the time. James needs experiences too. They said it like they were teaching me morals, like I was the selfish one for wanting to keep the only thing that ever belonged to me without a family vote. My dad tried to guilt trip me one night like he was some wise elder. When I was your age, I always shared with my brothers. That's what family does. I almost laughed. This from the man who hid the good snacks in his office so he wouldn't have to share with his own kids. I looked right at him and said, "When you were my age, did you rebuild a classic car from scratch with money you earned working your butt off while going to school?" That shut him up for about 5 minutes. My mom tried a different angle. She cornered me in the kitchen early one morning with her coffee cup and that fake concerned look she puts on when she's about to weaponize feelings. "Honey, I'm worried about you getting so attached to material things," she said softly. "It's just metal and rubber. Relationships are what matter." Funny how relationships only mattered when it was time for me to give something up. When James took from me, when they forgot me, when they ignored me, relationships were never the argument then. Things came to a head when James got accepted to State University. My parents threw a huge party, invited everyone they knew, acted like he'd gotten into an elite school instead of a decent one he barely qualified for. I still congratulated him. I didn't want to be bitter. I just wanted to exist in the same space without being punished for it. During dinner, Dad stood up and announced they had a surprise. He started talking about how James would need transportation for campus, which was about 40 minutes away, and then he looked straight at me. The whole table turned with him, faces bright with expectation, like they'd all been cued to watch me do the right thing. Dad said they thought I should let James use the Mustang while he was at school. The air went tight. I could feel that familiar pressure, the one I'd lived under my whole life, the unspoken rule that my needs were always optional and James's were always urgent. I didn't smile. I didn't play along. No, I said, that's not happening. 3 words. Simple. Calm. And you would have thought I'd set the table on fire. Dead silence. Dad tried to laugh it off and said we'd discuss it later, but I shut that down too. I said there was nothing to discuss. It was my car. End of story. My mom jumped in, saying I shouldn't be selfish because James needed reliable transportation for this important time in his life. Like college was somehow more important than my entire existence. I told them to buy him a car, like they bought him everything else he ever wanted. That's when Dad slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the gravy boat wobble. He called me ridiculous for making such a big deal over just a car. Just a car. That phrase again, like a knife in a familiar spot. I stood up and finally let out what I'd been holding in for years. I told them it was my car, rebuilt by me, titled to me, paid for by me, and I wasn't giving it to James just because he wanted it. I told them for once in their lives to tell their precious golden child no. I said maybe James could learn what it's like to work for something instead of having it handed to him on a silver platter. My mom looked at me like she couldn't believe I was actually standing up for myself. Dad looked like he was about to burst. James sat there with that frown, the same one he used when his usual process, want, whine, get, hit a wall. I walked out before anyone could respond. The next morning, Dad tried again, but calmer, like we were negotiating a contract. Listen, he said, I understand you've put a lot of work into that car. What if we compensate you for it? We could put money toward another project car for you, something you can work on while James takes the Mustang. He needs it now. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly them. They still didn't understand. They still thought everything had a price and that my pride could be bought as long as James got what he wanted. I told him, it's not about money. I don't want another project. I want the car I already rebuilt. And don't start with, it's just a car, because it's not. It means way more than that to me. Then he tried the selfish line again. James has an opportunity here. This could set him up for success. Don't you want what's best for your brother? I was so tired of that line, it felt like my bones were tired. What about what's best for me, Dad? I said. Has that ever crossed your mind even once? The look on his face told me everything. It genuinely hadn't. For the next couple weeks, the house turned into a cold war. My mom did the silent treatment like I was the one being unreasonable. Dad made little digs about team players and family sacrifice. James alternated between sulking and suddenly acting interested in my life, asking if I needed help with anything, offering to bring me food, calling me sis in a voice that sounded rehearsed. I kept my head down, focused on my classes and work, spent as little time at home as possible. I started seriously looking into getting my own place, even though rent in our area was brutal. I didn't have some grand plan. I just knew I needed distance before something snapped. I honestly believed they'd eventually get over it and buy James a car like normal parents would. Something affordable. Something that belonged to him. But they didn't want to spend money when they could take mine for free. Then I got a call from my aunt in Michigan. Grandpa Joe's health had taken a serious dive. The Parkinson's was getting worse, and during a routine checkup, the doctors found other issues. Heart concerns. The kind of words that make your stomach drop and your hands go cold. I panicked immediately. I planned to drive up to see him. 6 hours. I figured I'd stay for a long weekend. I told my parents I was going. We were barely speaking, but I told them anyway because Grandpa mattered. Mom nodded and said to give Grandpa their love. Dad grunted something about me missing work. Classic. I was furious they barely reacted. The man who had been more of a parent to me than they ever were, and they treated it like an inconvenient update. My friend Dean knew about the trip. Dean always loved Grandpa's stories. He offered to drive with me, said he'd been wanting to meet the legendary man in person. I thought about taking the Mustang, but Michigan roads in early spring are brutal, potholes like craters, salt damage, and I didn't want to risk the freshly restored undercarriage. Dean's truck had better heat anyway, and Michigan was still freezing in April, so we took that. When we got to Michigan, my entire mood changed. Grandpa was in rough shape, Seeing this tough old Marine, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, now barely able to hold a coffee cup, messed me up in a way I didn't expect. His body was failing, but his mind was sharp. He looked at me and grumbled, "Took your sweet time getting here," then winked so I'd know he was teasing. We sat with him for hours. He told stories. Dean listened like a kid in a candy store. Grandpa liked having an audience. For a little while it felt normal again, like we were back in his garage and nothing hurt. Dean had to head back after the first weekend for work. I stayed. Grandpa's condition was worse than I thought, and I couldn't leave. I slept on a cot in his room at the assisted living place, helped him move, made sure he ate. We had long talks late at night when the hallway was quiet and the nurses had turned the lights down. Of course he asked about the Mustang. I showed him pictures of the finished restoration on my phone. His eyes lit up like I'd handed him a trophy. "Damn," he said, voice rough. "You did good. Real good. I'm proud of you, kid." Then he looked at me like he could see straight through the walls of my life. "They giving you trouble about that car, aren't they?" I nodded. I told him about James wanting it for college, the party, the fight. Grandpa shook his head slowly. "Your dad never understood the value of working with your hands. Always wanted the easy way." Then he leaned forward just a little, like the weight of what he was about to say mattered. "Don't you give in," he said. "You hear me? That car is yours. You built it. You keep it." "I promise," I said. After almost 2 weeks, Grandpa stabilized enough that I felt okay going home. The nurses had a routine. My aunt checked in daily. I caught the Greyhound bus back because I didn't want to wait on anyone. The ride was long and uncomfortable, and I was exhausted by the time I reached my town's bus station. I texted my parents my ETA. No one offered a ride. I called an Uber. When I pulled into our driveway, something felt wrong instantly. The garage door was closed, but even before I opened it, I felt it in my gut. Like you can sense when something important has been removed from your life. I opened the garage. The Mustang wasn't there. I stood in the empty space where it should have been, staring at the oil stain on the concrete like it was the ghost of everything I'd built. For a second, I told myself maybe my dad had moved it. Maybe it was outside. Maybe it was at a shop. I checked the street, the side yard, everywhere. Nothing. I stormed inside and found my mom in the kitchen. "Where's my car?" I demanded. She jumped like she was surprised to see me, then tried to change the subject immediately. "Oh, you're back. How's your grandfather?" "Where's my Mustang?" I repeated, not letting her deflect. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Suddenly, she was very interested in the dish towel in her hands. "James took it to campus," she said quietly. "He needed a car for school, and since you were gone." My blood went cold. "He took my car to campus after I told all of you no." And that's when my dad walked in, and from the look on his face, I knew he already had the next line prepared. Dad didn't ease into it. He never does when he thinks he's right. He stood there with his arms crossed like a judge about to deliver a sentence and said, "Now listen, we tried to call you, but reception was spotty up there." "That's a lie," I said immediately. "I had signal the whole time. I texted you every day about Grandpa." He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "What's done is done. James needs that car more than you do right now." My hands started shaking. "That's my car. I'm going to campus and getting it back." Dad didn't raise his voice. That's what scared me. "That might be difficult." "What do you mean difficult?" He glanced at my mom, and they shared a look I'd seen my whole life. The look that meant decisions had already been made without me. "The title's been transferred," he said. "Legally. It's James's car now." For a second, my brain just stopped, like someone hit pause on reality. "You did what?" I said. "It just makes more sense for him to have it," Dad replied calmly. "He's starting college." "You transferred my title," I said slowly. "How did you do that without my signature?" Mom finally looked up. "We handled it." My stomach dropped. "You forged my signature." "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "We're your parents. We were making the right decision." "That's illegal," I said, already pulling out my phone. "Who are you calling?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "The police." Dad lunged forward and grabbed my phone out of my hand. "Don't be stupid. You'll regret it." I stared at him, every last bit of fear burning out of me. "Someone's going to regret this," I said quietly, "but it won't be me." I yanked my phone back and walked out. I called Dean. He picked me up 10 minutes later. The second I got in the truck, he looked at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I told him everything, all of it. The forged title, the lies, James driving my car around campus like it was his birthright. "What the actual hell?" Dean said. "That's not family drama. That's a crime." I crashed on his couch that night because there was no way I was going back home. I couldn't sleep. All I could see was James behind the wheel of my Mustang. showing it off, soaking in attention he didn't earn, while my parents sat at home congratulating themselves for fixing the problem. Dean's dad, Tom, came home late from work. He's a lawyer. Dean told him what happened, and Tom didn't even hesitate. "That's grand theft," he said. "Auto forgery, fraud, multiple felonies." He looked at me carefully. "You need to think about whether you want to pursue this. These are serious charges. Your parents and your brother could face real consequences." I didn't even have to think. "I'm done protecting them," I said. "They made their choice." My phone started blowing up. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. "Come home so we can talk. You're overreacting. Family comes first." I ignored every single one. The next morning, Operation Takedown began. First stop was the DM-Fi. I waited 2 hours in a plastic chair that smelled like old coffee and regret. When I finally got to the counter, I requested the title transfer records for the Mustang. There it was, my signature, dated the exact day I was sitting in a hospital room in Michigan with Grandpa. Forgery, clear as day. Next, I went back to my parents' house while they were at work and gathered every piece of evidence I had. Restoration receipts, before and after photos, the original paperwork from Grandpa transferring the car to me, texts from my parents acknowledging it was my project. I'd been meticulous without realizing how much it would matter someday. Tom suggested we prove I wasn't even in the state when the transfer happened. That part was almost laughable. I went to my bank and requested ATM footage. There I was on camera, withdrawing cash from a Michigan ATM on the same day my signature magically appeared at our local DM-Fi. I was 300 miles away. While all this was happening, my parents escalated. Angry messages turned into pleading. Pleading turned into guilt. "If you love your brother, you'll come home. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't respond. With everything compiled, Tom and I went to the police station. Filing those reports felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Grand theft, auto forgery, fraud. I expected to feel scared. Instead, I felt calm. 3 weeks passed with no word. 3 weeks of my parents calling nonstop. 3 weeks of messages calling me heartless, dramatic, selfish. I stayed busy, picked up extra shifts, helped Tom around the house, started looking for my own apartment. I wasn't just leaving my parents' house, I was leaving that version of my life. Then the detective called. "We're moving on your case," he said. "Officers are headed to your brother's dorm to recover the vehicle." My heart slammed into my ribs. It was finally happening. I hung up the phone and just stood there for a moment, staring at the wall like it might move. I'd spent my whole life being told to calm down, to be reasonable, to let things go for the sake of family. And now the police were walking into my brother's dorm to recover my car. It felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life finally catch up to the truth. An hour later, the detective called back. "They didn't find the Mustang at the dorm," he said. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean they didn't find it?" "According to your brother's roommate, he moved it to a friend's place for safekeeping. He got worried after your parents started texting him." Of course he did. James always ran. The second consequences looked real. What started as a family dispute turned into something much bigger right then. The detective told me they were expanding the investigation. My case wasn't just about a forged title anymore. It was about intent. 2 days later, they found it. The Mustang was in a storage unit about an hour from campus, rented under a fake name. They traced the payment back to my dad's credit card. When the officers opened the unit, the car was under a tarp. The VIN plates had already been removed. When the detective explained that part, his voice changed. "That's a felony by itself," he said. "It shows clear intent to conceal or sell the vehicle." I closed my eyes and let that sink in. They weren't just borrowing it. They weren't just trying to teach me a lesson. They were planning to make it disappear. The next day, James was arrested at his dorm for receiving stolen property and conspiracy. My parents were picked up at work and charged with forgery, fraud, and tampering with evidence. The local paper ran the story. Family charged in classic car theft scheme. There was even a photo of my parents being escorted into the courthouse, faces pale, their perfect image cracking in public. My phone exploded. Relatives I barely knew were suddenly desperate to talk. Old friends from high school texted asking if the rumors were true. My parents left voicemails that started angry, shifted into panic, then collapsed into pleading. "This will ruin James's future," my mom sobbed in one message. "He could go to jail. Is that what you want for your brother?" Another from my dad. "The legal fees are draining our savings. We might lose the house." I didn't call back, not once. Extended family split clean down the middle. Some were horrified by what my parents had done. Others blamed me for letting it get this far. My mom's sister left a voicemail calling me cruel and dramatic for destroying the family over a stupid car. I deleted it. Through all of it, I felt strangely steady, like I'd finally stepped out of the role they wrote for me. I wasn't the reasonable one anymore. I wasn't the buffer. I was just someone who refused to be robbed and lied to. The most unexpected call came from James, from county jail. He didn't sound smug this time. He sounded scared. He started with the usual nonsense. Misunderstanding. He thought I was okay with it because our parents said so. I cut him off immediately. Stop lying, I said. You know I told you no. There was a long pause. Then he admitted it. He said he figured I wouldn't press charges because family sticks together. He said our dad told him it wasn't a big deal and that the car was wasted on me anyway because I just worked on it instead of driving it somewhere worthwhile. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly them. Welcome to consequences, I said and hung up. The detective kept me updated as the case moved forward. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures, location proof, VIN removal, storage unit payments. Your parents' attorney asked about a plea deal, the detective told me. No, I said. This doesn't go away. The legal system moved the way it always does, slow enough to make you doubt it ever will, then fast enough to make you wish you'd brace sooner. Weeks turned into months while lawyers talked and paperwork stacked up, but behind the scenes, everything was already decided. The evidence didn't leave room for spin. Forged signatures don't become less forged just because someone says family a lot. VIN plates don't remove themselves by accident. The prosecutor wasn't interested in making it go away. Tom warned me not to expect mercy just because they were my parents. He said judges tend to get especially cold when people use family to justify fraud. That turned out to be true. James was the first to fall. The charges stuck. Grand theft auto, tampering with evidence, conspiracy. State University expelled him the moment the conviction came down. No appeals, no second chances, 8 months in county jail, 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service. Watching my brother, the kid who never faced a real consequence in his life, finally collide with reality was surreal. Not satisfying, just inevitable. My parents didn't fare much better. They were charged with forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. The court didn't care that they were just trying to help their son. The judge didn't let them serve their time on weekends like they begged. 30 days in county jail, 18 months probation, massive fines. My dad lost his accounting job almost immediately. Turns out companies don't like trusting money to convicted fraudsters. On top of the criminal cases, the civil suit Tom filed crushed what little control they thought they had left. Legal fees bled them dry. They had to sell the house to cover damages. They tried to declare bankruptcy to escape the judgment. The court denied it. The life they'd built on appearances collapsed quietly and completely. Through their court-appointed lawyer, they made one last attempt to reach me, offered to take out another loan, offered to pay for the car and then some if I'd drop the charges. They said we were still a family and could get past this. I sent back one line through Tom. We stopped being a family when you chose James over me for the last time. The Mustang was eventually returned to me by court order. It came back with a dent in the fender and a few deep scratches, but nothing I couldn't fix. When I stood in the impound lot and saw it again, my hands resting on the hood, I didn't feel relief. I felt resolve. They hadn't just tried to take my car. They'd tried to erase me, and they failed. While all of this was happening, I'd been staying with Dean and his family. They never once made me feel like a burden, but I knew I needed something permanent. I didn't just want to move out. I wanted to get away, completely. Away from the house where I learned to disappear. Away from the roles that kept replaying no matter how old I got. So I made a decision that scared me and felt right at the same time. I packed everything I owned, which turned out to be less than I thought. I quit my job. I transferred my community college credits, and I moved to Michigan to live with Grandpa Joe. His Parkinson's wasn't getting better. He needed someone there more consistently than my aunt could manage, and after everything that had happened, being with him felt like the only place that made sense. I found a part-time job at a local auto restoration shop almost immediately. The owner actually looked at my work, asked real questions, treated my skills like they mattered. The first weekend after I settled in, I drove the Mustang up to Grandpa's place so he could see it properly in the sunlight. He was tired, thinner, but when he ran his shaking hand along the fender, his smile was worth every mile. He told me he was proud of me again, and this time there was no chaos trying to drown it out. Living with Grandpa those months was the best thing that could have happened for both of us. I cooked. I helped him move. We watched old westerns in the evenings, him falling asleep halfway through and still insisting I tell him how they ended. He gave me advice about engines and life like they were the same thing, both needing patience, attention, and respect. My parents tried to visit after Grandpa took a bad turn. He refused to see them, said he didn't want hypocrites in his house. I didn't argue. Grandpa passed away 6 months after I moved in, peacefully. I was with him that night, telling him about a charger the shop had just taken in. He smiled and fell asleep, and that was it. I grieved harder than I ever had, but I didn't feel alone. At the funeral, my family showed up. James looked wrecked. My parents looked old, smaller. They tried to talk to me. I kept my distance. Grandpa deserved better than another fight. After the service, the lawyer read the will. Grandpa left everything to me. The house, the tools, his savings. My dad looked like he'd been slapped. I later learned he'd been counting on that inheritance to fix the financial mess they'd made. The lawyer handed me an envelope, a letter from Grandpa. It started with, "To my real kid." I cried right there. I read Grandpa's letter alone that night, sitting at the small kitchen table where he used to drink his coffee and pretend it wasn't mostly cream. The paper smelled faintly like oil and old books, like him. He wrote that the last months we spent together were the happiest he'd had in years. He wrote that watching me work, fix, build, and refuse to be small reminded him of the kind of man he'd always hoped his family would raise. He asked me to keep the Mustang running smooth. He said some things are worth protecting, even when it costs you people you thought were permanent. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the glove box of the Mustang. It felt like the right place, like part of the car's story now, not just mine. Life in Michigan didn't magically erase the damage my family left behind, but it gave me space to heal without constantly reopening the wound. I finished transferring my credits and settled into school nearby. The restoration shop kept giving me more responsibility. Customers trusted my work. Coworkers asked my opinion. Nobody treated my effort like a nuisance or a threat. For the first time, I didn't have to explain why something mattered to me. It just did. My parents tried to contact me again. Then through relatives. They asked for help, for forgiveness, for another chance. I blocked every number, not out of spite, out of clarity. That door wasn't slammed shut in anger. It was closed carefully and locked because I finally understood what letting them back in would cost. James reached out once through a third party, asking if we could talk when he got out. I didn't respond. Some lessons aren't reinforced by conversation. They're reinforced by absence. Every Sunday when the weather's good, I take the Mustang out along the lake roads, windows down, engine humming steady and deep. The water stretches out beside me, wide and honest. I don't drive fast. I drive smooth. Grandpa would have approved. Sometimes I think about the kid I used to be, the one who learned early not to expect much, the one who kept his head down and worked quietly, hoping someone would notice. I wish I could tell that version of myself that he wasn't invisible. He was just surrounded by people who didn't know how to see him. Now I live in a house left to me by the only person who ever truly did. I have a job I love, friends who respect me, a future that feels open instead of conditional, and a car that reminds me every day what I'm capable of building when no one's trying to take it away. The road is quiet out here. No guilt, no noise, no one telling me to understand or compromise or be the bigger person. Just miles of asphalt and the steady proof that I never needed their permission to become myself. That chapter is over, and I'm not going back.